Hi, everyone. If you can hear us okay. My name is Vibeke. We are here to address resources. So we have materials such as plastics and paper, essential for modern economies, yet they contribute to pollution, to deforestation, and landfills. Production of textiles alone contribute to more than 3% of global CO2 emissions, which mostly relate to the extraction of virgin materials, virgin cottons and virgin polyesters. There are many ways to address this problem. And this session will focus on recycling. And the question we're asking ourselves is really recycling the silver bullet? And what role can recycling play in the future in creating jobs and dignifying salaries for families and individuals? And what will it take to scale? And is there a role for investors such as Norfund in this space? So in this short panel, we will address some of these very large questions. And lucky for me, I have this amazing panel with Olawale, Karoline, and Carl Johan. Let me start out with you, Olawale. You've, over the last few years, you have been instrumental in building a really interesting scale-up Wecyclers in Nigeria with a support of investments from Norfund. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey so far?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Wecyclers is a for-profit social enterprise based in Lagos, Nigeria, and we've been in business for just over 12 years. And we literally started out with just one bicycle. And the objective of the company is really to go into low-income communities and help them capture value from their waste. And when we started the company, the focus, at the time was how do we deal with waste? Lagos was generating over 15,000 metric tons of waste daily, but only 40% of that was actually collected in a formal way. And so you can imagine that we were drowning in our own waste. And so what the objective of the company was to go into communities that couldn't afford waste management, that couldn't afford to be rid of what was causing a lot of pollution and poverty, and give them a means to generate some type of value from that. So providing value for them to have a means of a livelihood. And so the concept was to collect these materials from the households, and then take the material, sell it to people that can be used for an offtake. And over the years, as I mentioned, we started out with just one bicycle. We've been able to scale up the business to a point where we've collected over 18,000 tons of different recyclable materials. And just from last year to this year, we doubled our collection volumes. And what we're doing now, as we continue to build a collection framework, is to look at how we can continue to go up the value chain. Because what's very important for us is to be able to be sustainable as a business, to be able to make a profit, because that allows us to continue to add value to these communities. And the best way for us to do that is to extract as much value as we can from the materials we collect, and be able to put that back into ensuring that the value chain is solid, and we can continue to expand, not just within the community we are, but communities across the entire region.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Karoline, you lead an organization that envisions a future where people can live in harmony with nature. It is very beautiful.
Yes.
What role do you see recycled materials play in that future?
I think recycling is not the solution, it's a tool. But it is actually a tool to address a much bigger challenge, which is about how we extract our natural resources, but also how we use them or misuse them in many ways. And when you talk about recycling, that's very often talked about as part of a waste hierarchy, where it actually comes quite far down. Because what we want to do first is reduce and reuse, which we don't talk too much about. And I think recycling, and we have been particularly working on plastic as a challenge and been involved in multiple projects both in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And I think we see some of the same challenges in all places, where there is an opportunity to maybe look at just the recycling part or just part of the value chain, where you want to scale up or making sustainable kind of financial model over time, exactly at what you said, you need to look more at the whole value chain. And I think one of the key things I see, both from investors, from governments, not at least, is that it's easy to fund part of the value chain. It's easy to kind of fund a project that is looking at a particular part of the value chain, for example, around plastic, but not the whole thing to really address the key challenge, which comes in the design phase of kind of, do you make plastic products that can be recycled? Because a lot of plastic products can't even be recycled or reused. So I think that's the really big challenge we have. Under this, that we don't look at the waste, the whole kind of waste system from the beginning, the whole life cycles of the products.
Do you think that recycling can fuel consumption?
Absolutely. I think we see that it's been misused by some actors, global brands, who said this is recycled material, so we want to sell more. And a good example is actually the use of plastic bottles, where you see big brands like H&M saying, we have collected plastic bottles, we are putting them into a fine dress called sustainable. You use that dress, you wash it in your washing machine, then you actually release microplastic into the environment, and there are no deposit scheme for that plastic dress, because it's a plastic dress at the end of the day. Whereas you actually can use a system where you actually collect the plastic bottles, recycle to be used as a PET bottle again, or another commodity within the food sector, which is more sustainable than putting it in a dress where you have actually releasing more plastic into nature. So it's just one of the challenges a lot of, I think, brands and companies hasn't thought about. And it's been something that we can hide behind to really not talk about the root cause, which is overconsumption.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's an excellent example. And it's not easy to be a consumer these days, because you think you're buying something so-called recycled, and it turns out to be a new bottle from China, turned into a dress. Karl-Johan, with these challenges, you lead the green infrastructure investment team in Norfund. And we are looking at investments in the recycling space. So what are the challenges and the opportunities you see in this space?
Well, first, I mean, back to Karina's point regarding recycling being one of the tools. I think when we look at Africa, we heard earlier today that Africa is one of the regions which will see the highest consumption growth going forward. We also see population growth in Africa altogether, and we also see kind of a migration from countryside to cities, and these factors jointly add up to an increase in waste, right? And that's a huge challenge. I think something needs to be done about that. So yes, we need to work with reduction and reuse, but we cannot not work with recycling.
Okay.
And then when it comes to waste specifically, waste per definition is something someone doesn't any longer want to have, because it doesn't have any value, it doesn't have any function, right? And making business out of something which people does not want is much more complicated than making business on something which people actually wants to have, right? So that's where the first challenge starts. And then, like, when shifting to opportunities, Africa probably has the highest reuse share in the world. If I would put the fridge on the street in Lagos, I would believe it takes a minute and then it's gone, right? If I put a fridge on the street in Oslo, I mean, it will stay there until the snowplow comes during winter. Right?
Probably.
So there is a very strong culture of reuse. You really take advantage of the values in the material. We also see thousands of waste pickers earning the livelihood of picking waste. So what is waste to one person and what doesn't have value to one person may have value to another person. So and that, I think, is where we see the opportunity in finding those pockets where there is value to someone else. And that could be a material. It could be by applying technology to certain products, which hasn't been applied before. And it's also about infusing competence, taking learnings which we have from other markets and applying them in a market which way it hasn't been done yet. And there, I think Norfund's role is very important in that we can, in this complex sector, lift something and kind of make an example and showcase that business models actually work. And there will be a lot of ripple effects. You will be able to go into more materials, paper, glass, once systems are established. But it's a big risk taking that step because it's very limited today, and that's where our role comes.
Thank you for that. Olawale, I'd like to hear your views here, where you see a role for Norfund. And I know that you and the company you're currently involved with, I mean, you've set a very ambitious target for 2030. You're aiming to collect 30,000 tons of plastics alone. You are aiming to create 700 jobs, many for women, many for households in impoverished areas. And you are really expanding with a regional model. Can you tell us a little bit what you see? What are the success factors and some of the challenges in achieving that, and how you see Norfund contributing?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we've been on a very long journey from when we started. So Wecyclers has been in business for about 12 years. And during that period of time, we really had to work on how we perfected or at least improved our model for a point where it can actually be sustainable. We are very, very keen on the fact that we want to have a business that is viable, not relying on grants or handouts. We really believe that in order for us to be able to make lasting impact, we have to be able to add value in some ways and give people the opportunity to also be able to make a living. For us, the opportunity that we see with the partnership with Norfund is to construct a recycling plant which will add further value to the material that we collect. And just to talk about the impact, when we go to these communities, a lot of the individuals that live in these communities don't have any other source of livelihoods. And so we are providing them an opportunity to earn a livable wage. So in some cases, we have people that are earning more than 3 times the livable wage by going around and collecting recyclable materials in their normal course of business, not necessarily going out as what we consider like a waste collector or a waste picker. We like to focus on households because we believe that the problem can be solved by dealing with it at the source. What we see a lot of is that you see dump sites where people mine dump sites, and it's really a nightmare. And we avoid or try to avoid people going to this lens, but giving them the understanding that they can make value from collecting materials in their normal course of business and bringing it to Wecyclers. The value that they're able to extract and give them livelihoods, in addition to what we're impacting those individuals, we're creating jobs. And the jobs that we are creating as a business for Wecyclers is also included in our franchising model, where we go out to other communities, engage entrepreneurs to set up mini Wecyclers setups across the country. So we do see an opportunity to create a lot of jobs over the next few years, but ensuring that we are tying those jobs to a sustainable offtake. And that is where the plant comes in, because it gives them an additional value for that material they're collecting. And we've seen over the past 10 to 12 years that the shift of the mindset on people on the material. I was mentioning to Karoline earlier today that if you go to Lagos and you're looking in a gutter, 10 years ago, you would see it lined with plastic bottles, and PET in particular, which is a majority of what packaging that we see and we're exposed to. Today, you have a very difficult time to see that, which I think has led to a shift in people's mindset, because now they're assigning a value to that. And for us, the most critical job we have, I would say, is really helping solve poverty. A lot of people ask me, are you about the environment or poverty? And I always say poverty first, because in order for them to really be focused on the environment, they have to be able to solve the biggest challenge that they're facing today, which is poverty. So the more we can assign a value to these materials, the more that they can actually explore that value, carry themselves out of poverty, and be able to add more value to society. And so that's really where we see this partnership leading us to, because as we extract more value from the materials, we can put it back into the value chain to ensure that it stays robust and it can last over a long period of time.
Thank you. Karoline?
Yeah, I think kind of two things I want to pick up on, and one is the informal waste pickers, which we know is very often overlooked as kind of a key element. So you actually can go in and doing a project thinking that now you're going to help the community and actually make the situation worse for the local community. Because in informal waste pickers, they have traditionally a model for how they do things, but they are informal. They're not part of a formal system. But they are really important, kind of how they can be empowered as a sector, but also how do you give them rights. And depending on kind of which country you are in, the national government may have an idea on how they want to get them to be formal waste pickers, but some places they want to stay informal waste pickers. So that's knowing the local context in recycling projects or in waste projects, I would say, in general, is one of the key things, because there is a lot of local, regional solution that can't necessarily be exported to elsewhere. And I think for us being involved in this now for a few years, the expectation, for example, to use the lessons learned in the western part of the world, just transport that technology, transport that idea, doesn't really work, because there's local context that you need to know about, like Wecyclers kind of really demonstrate. You need to know the local context to find the best solution. And the other thing is, I think what we talk a little bit too little about is also the market side for these products that are being recycled from the local initiative. Because still, for example, on plastic, virgin plastic material is cheaper than recycled plastic material in the global economy. So that's a key challenge also, kind of how we make these scalable solutions in terms of really addressing that we don't extract and make more virgin plastic material, but are getting that we are actually using more recycled plastic material. And plastic is a lot of things. So PET bottles has a high value. Other things like you have these kind of very thin plastic bags that is used in different things has no value and are not being recycled either, because it hasn't value and isn't a good material either. So finding that side on kind of thinking value chain again, and also on the market side, how can we work also to provide that market for recycled plastic? I think we have talked too little about.
I think you're right, and I think we could go on for about a couple of hours, but we'll save you from that. And coming in then into the last question, and that's a question for all of us, and it kind of taps into some of the larger dilemmas here, because for this to be an investable area, both a scalable and investable area, what needs to come in place? And we need to be short.
For me, I say, definitely regulatory framework, ensuring that there is regulation that forces or encourages brands to use recycled material in packaging. Because you mentioned something about closing the loop, and as opposed to putting materials in textiles, you want to put them back in the packaging to ensure that you improve that recyclable and close that loop in a proper way. So I think that's the first part, which then drives demand.
Yes.
Because we are seeing a lot of demand for our material because of the regulation that has been put in place. So certainly, I think the first step, I would say, is really driving regulatory framework.
Thank you. Karoline.
Yeah, and building on the regulatory framework, getting an ambitious global plastic treaty, which is now in process and hopefully being adopted in August, which is setting the global rules around plastic designs and which plastic products shouldn't be allowed, for example, is key to address this problem globally.
And looking into the glass fund, Karl-Johan, what do you see?
I think building on the regulatory framework, I think we see that happening in many countries in Africa. So the so-called extended producer responsibility schemes, which puts responsibility at the producer to ensure that there is recycling and to pay for that. And that we see happening. We see it in Nigeria, we see it in South Africa, we see it in Kenya. Small steps, certain materials, but it's being rolled out, and I think that is the solution. It needs to be accelerated, and it needs to be also encouraged by the EU, for instance, helping out with that regulatory.
Thank you. And we could go on forever, but I think we will just end by this. And thank you to the panelists for your insights and for your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much.